With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind. Enlighten my intelligence and wisdom so that I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. Okay. Well, Veronica, I actually have, there was a few sessions ago, you asked a question and I'll be ready to answer it today. So let's see here. Okay. But we'll do that at the end of the session. And I'll end a little bit early today, also because I'm doing another class which will start exactly at 11:30. So I might just give myself just a few minutes break between the two events, but we'll go until then. Yeah. So the root text says, as well as vows of upavasa and upasaka, the bodhisattvas who are householders maintain the twofold bodhicitta constantly in aspiration and in deed. Those who have embraced monastic life, as well as vows of bhikkhu, shamanera, and shikshamana, uphold the bodhicitta both in aspiration and in deed. Both maintain the discipline according to their state. So we're talking about two categories. One are the householders, the lay people, and the other are the monastics. And both of these then uphold the discipline of bodhicitta, which is then what we're currently discussing. So we have covered the bodhicitta of aspiration, and now we're looking at the bodhicitta of application. And in there, we're looking at the 6 paramitas. And in the context of the 6 paramitas, then we are discussing the paramita of discipline, and that's where we're then looking at the various kinds of ordinations and how the bodhicitta is combined with the monastic ordinations. So in the commentary, let's see here. So in the commentary then, it runs, lay practitioners who uphold any of the upasaka vows, as will be explained in due course, or the 24-hour discipline of upavasa, whether on a temporary or lifetime basis, and who in addition constantly maintain the twofold bodhicitta of aspiration and action, are known as bodhisattva upasakas. So the upasaka vows, they are then will be explained, but they are essentially the vows that lay people will take. And the upavasa are in Tibetan known as nyine, and that's where you take basically one day at a time. So you take the same vows, but you simply just say, I'm going to uphold this discipline today. So then the text continues, ordained people who keep the vows of bhikkhu or bhikkhuni, shamanera or shamanerika, or shikshamana, female novice in training for full ordination, and who in addition have bodhicitta in aspiration and action, are considered to uphold the bodhisattva discipline of avoiding negativities. So there's actually something to be said about, I don't know if it's here where this discussion takes place. Yeah, these are just the Tibetan names for what we've just looked at here. Then we have so that's general. Now, the levels of ordination, and then first the precepts of lay people, and that's where verses 41 and 42 then say, upasakas are differentiated into 2 kinds. There are those who keep a single precept, such as not to kill. If then they give up stealing, they maintain the vows in part. If then they promise not to lie, they hold a major part of them. If they turn from sexual misdeeds and keep from alcohol, these are considered upasakas of a complete observance. So we have basically 5 vows. And we would say the 4 are the most important. But in addition to that, if you also keep the vow of abstaining from alcohol, you're more sure to actually keep the other 4. The thing is, once you take alcohol, then the other 4, they're a little bit sort of endangered. And then it continues, then those who have renounced the 4 roots and abstained from alcohol, renouncing thus all 5, are honored as upasakas of pure conduct. So we'll see the implication of that then. Kangyur Rinpoche says, there are 2 kinds of lay upasakas, the so-called complete upasaka and the upasaka of pure conduct. If one renounces a single negative action out of the 4, killing, for example, one is said to be, quote, keeping a single precept. If then one vows not to steal, one is said to be keeping a few precepts or having a part of the complete ordination, if you like. If in addition one vows not to lie, one is said to be keeping a major part of the precepts, meaning 3 out of 5. If again one formally renounces sexual misconduct, one is said to be keeping 3.5. The expression 3.5 is explained. See, this is where just renouncing sexual conduct, that sort of that accounts for half. Because full observance, as Kangyur Rinpoche then explained, then implies complete abstinence, celibacy. Finally, in addition to the 3.5 vows just mentioned, one renounces alcohol, one is said to be a complete upasaka, given that without refraining from alcohol, it is impossible to observe the other commitments perfectly. The upasaka of pure conduct is one who has renounced all 4 root downfalls, namely killing, stealing, lying, and all sexual activity, together with the consumption of alcohol. So let's just see if there's a comment here. The category of upasaka of pure conduct, Sangche Genyen, includes all who are observing the 24-hour precept of upavasa, a vow which was given for the sake of lay people who find it too difficult to renounce sexual activity completely. They can thus observe pure conduct for a day at a time, on which occasions they observe the precepts of the Shramanera ordination. Okay, so you can be what's called a Sangche Genyen, which means essentially a celibate layman, but you can be a celibate for 1 day at a time as well as taking it for a lifetime. 43. Deriving from the 10-fold precepts of the Shamanera, but granted the employ of gold and silver for the maintenance of wives and children, and with dancing and the use of ornaments regarded as a single minor flaw, those who keep this 8-fold discipline at all times and without a limitation are upasakas according to the way of Chandra Gorman. So this was a well-known, Chandra Gorman was a well-known layperson, very learned. So Kangyur Rinpoche comments, lay people who are practicing the 24-hour upavasa discipline are obliged to observe 9 of the 10 precepts of the Shamanera ordination. They renounce all but the use of gold and silver, which they are allowed to accept as a means of sustaining their family. So remember, and you still have this, I think, practiced. Well, you do actually have some monks in the Tibetan tradition, I think, that observe this, which is not touching money. It's more common in the Theravadan tradition. But it's also generally acknowledged that it's a bit unpractical not being able to touch money. And so it's generally sort of quite commonly accepted, and particularly here in terms of talking about the lay people, then it makes complete sense. Their discipline is, however, commonly referred to as the 8-branch discipline, for all kinds of dancing and the wearing of ornaments are counted as a single minor fault for all of them. And that's where you could have lay people who still wear ornaments and so on. All this is explained in the Yogacharya Bhumi Shastra of Asanga. Those who maintain this discipline every day without a time limit, in other words, for the rest of their lives, are described as upasakas after the manner of Chandragomin. So this means those that keep it every day. Let's see here. Who retake the vow every day. Yeah, renewing the vow each morning. Yeah. So that's for the lay people. Now the monastics. Let's just have a look at the monastic. There are some things that of course, when we're hearing this, I think it's quite useful for us to have an idea of what, when we talk about discipline in the Buddhist context, that it's quite clear that it's not a vague topic. It's very precise, but also to be aware that some of it, obviously, it will be very difficult to implement as far as our situation goes. We come from a culture where there's no real monastic tradition, at least not Buddhist monastic tradition. And even if there are, they're quite difficult to come across. And living in a culture where Buddhism is so new and so, you could say, widely misunderstood and so on, there's not really the same degree of support and structure that we have in the cultures in which this text was written. So that's where it's more for us to hear this really as you could say, as something that generates respect and just think, oh, wow, this is what these people were doing, because we come across monastics all the time in the Buddhist tradition, obviously, but to sort of have a clear idea what their discipline involves, at least at a superficial level, because of course we can't go into the depths of all of this. There's hundreds of hours, and that's where and also there are some things, and I have to warn you, there's going to come some things that differentiate between the monks and the nuns that I'm not sure would go down terribly well in the common discourse. But again, this is situated within different cultures with different experiences and different norms, different parameters, and so on. So we have to be a little bit sort of flexible with regards to that. But nevertheless, my point is, I think it generates a lot of faith and a lot of appreciation for the involvement of the monastics to hear what it consists of. And of course, what we're looking at here is really just the paramita the paramita of discipline as it applies in our practice of the bodhicitta of application. But again, just to have some veneration for the monastics and also the lay people that uphold these particular vows. So now specifically around the monastics, it says the monastic discipline should possess 8 qualities. It should be 1, unimpaired, that is not transgressed even once. So that's where there's certain vows. For example, celibacy. You can't be a monk, a celibate monk, and then say, well, I'm sort of a, how do you say, I'm sort of a weekend monk or whatever, occasionally I'll transgress the vows. That doesn't work. The vows have to be kept without any infringement. So it should therefore be 2, faultless, because free it is of any defect. It should be 3, unadulterated, through not being mixed with any unwholesome factors. So that's where we might take a vow, for example, of celibacy, but then it's also because we decide we hate the other sex or something like that. And then it's not really, you could say, intended on the path of enlightenment. It should also be unsullied by motivations aiming at prosperity and the concerns of this life. And this, of course, also you have in Asian cultures where being a monastic could very well be a lucrative and easy way of passing your life. So that's no good either. It should be uncontaminated by inconsistency. Yeah? It should be powerful through possessing the 5 foregoing qualities. And that's the thing, if the vows are held according to how they should be held, then it's something that gives great support and power in the practice of the path. And 7, praised by the learned and the Aryas. So we should do so that we are doing it properly, though, please those who have the eye of wisdom, the Aryas. Finally, it should favor the practice of concentration. That's, of course, when we have the three trainings, we talk about Shila, discipline, we're talking about here, then concentration. And it's through concentration then that we integrate fully and gain experience and realization in prajna, what will set us free. So that's where then Yunten Gyatso here says, concentration renders the mind serviceable so that wisdom and the other qualities of the path may develop. Therefore, discipline is the ground in which all qualities can grow. So the precepts of the Shramaneras. So there's a few. Okay, this is actually an important point here. It says the vows of Shamanera or Getsul, this is the novice vows, are sometimes referred to in English as novice vows. This is incorrect. The term novice in this context has been mistakenly borrowed from Christian monasticism, where it denotes a monk in training prior to profession or the taking of complete ordination of vows. The novitiate is necessarily a temporary condition, usually lasting between 1 and 2 years. In Buddhism, by contrast, the Shamanera or Getsul ordination embodies a complete monastic grade in itself, and many monks keep this ordination throughout their lives. Moreover, given that the lineage of Bhikkhuni or Gelongma vows has been interrupted and may never have existed in Tibet, the vast majority of Tibetan Buddhist nuns are permanently Getsulmas. And that's why you wouldn't refer to the Getsulmas as just being novice nuns. They're not. They simply have the Getsulma ordination. Now, we do actually in the Chinese tradition, then there is a lineage of complete ordination, the Bhikkhuni lineage. And so you have persons like, for example, Jetsunma Tenzin Palmo, who went to Hong Kong and received it there. Also, you had in recent time also Anijamba, who had complete ordination. And there are then, you could say, efforts being made to reintroduce or to introduce then the Bhikkhuni ordination within the Tibetan monastic tradition. So those who have received the Shamanera ordination, so the Getsul, are bound to abstain from 4 root faults. They vow not to perpetrate the act of killing a human being or human embryo. They vow not to steal the property of another. They vow not to indulge in sexual intercourse through any of the 3 openings. So that basically means celibacy, we may assume. Finally, they vow not to lie to someone who understands speech, who knows what is being talked about, who is in a normal state of consciousness, and who is not a hermaphrodite or without sexual differentiation. Okay, this is where it gets a bit confusing. Now, obviously, lying doesn't qualify as lying if we say a lie to somebody who doesn't understand what we're saying anyway. What we mean with lie is for somebody who actually understands and is, you could say, taken in by our deceit. But this is where it gets a little bit of confusing, because then it talks about hermaphrodites and sexual orientation. And I have read this note several times, but I have to confess to you, I'm still a bit little bit confused with the concept as such. So here then the translators trying to explain this say the basic idea here is that a lie is only completely accumulated and the vow broken when a falsehood is spoken to a human being with the above mentioned qualifications. Okay, that we can get, right? That's somebody who perfectly understands what we're saying and as a consequence are deceived by what we say. Then it gets a bit, maybe you can figure it out, but I'm having some difficulty. Hermaphrodites and so on are presumably mentioned here in the sense of their not being in possession of the entire range of human attributes. The preoccupation, and that, of course, this is the point that we should take with us. The preoccupation is one of scholastic precision in stipulating the criteria for the loss of the vow. It does not mean that lying to eunuchs is admissible. Okay. Anyway, I think what we should take with us, this is really just trying to be precise in terms of being clear with the ramifications of lying, even though the presumptions here, I would say, they come with um, some cultural foundation that I don't possess. I'm not so familiar with the world of hermaphrodites and also eunuchs. So bear with me on that one. Anyway, if any of these four root faults is committed in such a way that the four fundamental elements of basis, intention, act, and result. And remember, when we looked at the chapter on karma, then um, the any karmic action or any action has its particular result on the basis of, you could say, what it is that we're acting upon. Let's say it's another person. There's somebody that we are, let's say anger. And let's say we're angry at a mosquito. So that's where we have the basis, which is anger. And then there's the intention to kill the mosquito. And then we go ahead and kill the mosquito. And then we go, yay, the mosquito is dead. At that time, then there's a complete karmic action. There's a complete result. If, for example, we sort of find out that we tread on a mosquito or we tread on some smaller being and we immediately go, oh no, that's terrible, then the intention was not there, the act was there, and the result was there. But because the intention wasn't there, then it doesn't qualify, you could say, in its full, the full karmic result. The result is different. And of course, we can only speculate about what actions actually entail. We have some rough laws for it, what sort of generally. But one thing that's important in all of this is, of course, that actions are such that they're so composed of a mix of the basis, the object, the intention, and so on, that it's not, that we would say it's only a Buddha that completely understands what are the causes and the results of particular actions. But of course, what we can be sure of is that there are results. So that's where there's a big difference between intending to kill someone or something, or not intending, and it just happens without any, any intention. That's where we should understand karma as being complex. Sometimes in the sort of popular understanding of karma, it's like, okay, this happens, then that happens. It's like, that there's a direct linear connection, and it's not at all linear. It's complex and composed of all the various conditions that we are seeing here. I think that's what this little comment is about. Yeah, see chapter 3, which was about karma. So once these four fundamental elements are there, if they're all complete, that really if the fault, such as, for example, breaking the vow of not stealing or whatever, intending to steal, being happy that we got what we stole, and so on, then we say the ordained state of shamanera is torn asunder. Whether the ordination can be repaired depends on whether there is any intention to conceal the act. And that's where then, if it's hidden, then of course the vow is completely broken. But if for a number of reasons, then there is something, if anyway, if the person that has then committed this act regrets it and exposes it and so on, then it can be repaired. The same applies here in the case of fully ordained monks. And that's also where we can see in the monastic communities and also among lay practitioners, their practices of repairing one's vows. There's a clear understanding that on the spiritual path, we set a particular standard, a high standard for our conduct. And predictably, we are very often under the influence of toxic states of mind in which we then fail to abide by this moral standard. And that's where then we need to have ways of repairing it. It's no good if we set a very high standard and then we can't live up to it. And then we say, oh, I give up, I can't do this. This is too difficult, The beauty and you could say the realism in this, and the pragmatism of the spiritual path is such that it accommodates the human factor. Of course, in our culture, we have a practice of always ridiculing the practice of confession. It's sort of the idea that, you do all your sins and then you go and you go to the confession booth and the priest tells you to do all these Hail Marys, and then you go out and do the Hail Marys, and then you do the same thing over again. So that's where very often in popular discourse, there's sort of a general sense that confession is a bit of a joke. But of course, it's not. If you're really a serious practitioner, then you need to have a discipline that extends beyond what we're presently at. We're sort of raising the level, right? This is the implication of the path. And predictably, there's going to be impediments and the inability to live this all the time. So this is really where it's absolutely essential to the spiritual path to have some medium through which one can then repair these vows. So with the vows, there also comes the whole, you could say, discussion around breaking the vows. And that's only being pragmatic. So then it says, there are, moreover, 6 additional faults, which, if committed, must be confessed. These are, 1, the taking of alcohol or any other intoxicating substance, because they impair vigilance. We become careless once we're a bit tipsy. 2, the indulgence in all that is a cause of pretension and attachment for the things of samsara, such as art, dancing, singing, playing, and music. Of course, this is where we shouldn't confuse things because, for example, within the tantric tradition, which employs sensuality as expressing the sacred, and where we integrate our perceptions of phenomena as sacred on the basis of what we call sacred outlook, then there is the engagement of art, of dancing, singing, music, and so on. But that's done without the dualistic attachment that ordinarily then is the cause for samsara. So we need to be clear on what's what here. 3, the wearing of ornaments, garlands, perfumes, and cosmetics. So again, these are seen as problems if they are enhancing our attachment and essentially the cause of suffering, dualistic fixation. 4, the use of valuable furniture, seats, and beds adorned with precious substances. All such accoutrements should be of plain wood and in any case no more than a cubit in height. All right, so this is, of course, to some extent cultural, but also I think we all get the sort of the point. 5, the consumption of food at improper times, such as after midday. It says here, all meals should be confined to the period between the hours of dawn and noon. So that's where, in a place like Tibet that was quite cold, then there was generally sort of an accommodation that there would be all right if ordained people, they had meals at night. But the implication is, of course, that if you only eat 1 meal a day, then there's greater capacity for the practice of concentration. But anyway, you do have Tibetan monks that uphold this. As by the way, you also have Tibetan monks and lay people who are vegetarians. Very often people think all Tibetan people eat meat, but that's not at all true. You have Tibetans that are vegetarians. Nowadays, you have Tibetan lamas that are vegans. For example, Jigme Rinpoche and Tugupema Wangyal. And also lamas like His Holiness the Karmapa has actually banned meat in monasteries. I don't know how it's going with upholding it, but that's just to say that there is certainly a wide appreciation for vegetarianism in the Tibetan community. And 6, the acceptance of precious gifts such as gold and silver, and the use of these as though they were personal possessions. And again, there's a practical appreciation or practical way of handling money just because it should be there for keeping oneself alive, but to use them as if they were personal possessions, and so on. That's not okay. So Shamaneras, again, Getsus, are considered superior to the Upasakas. To save them, however, from being overwhelmed by a multitude of regulations, their vows have been condensed into 10 general precepts, as mentioned before. This was established after the incident of the Rishi Putraka, as recorded in the Vinaya. Now, this is a story of some monastics that decided to make up their own vows. They found it too complicated, and then they just went ahead and made their own little vows, sort of homemade vows. That's why then they were simplified into these 10 that then should, there shouldn't be any confusion. Nevertheless, in considering the matter in more detail, the vows of the Shamanera ordination specifically prohibit 33 transgressions. These comprise, first of all, the 4 transgressions of homicide, lying, theft, and sexual intercourse. So these are the most important vows, really. And it's said that if these are broken, then the vows are lost. These can't be repaired. Linked with these are 3 kinds of killing: the slaughter of animals, the flooding of vegetation that is the habitat of insects, and the drinking of water in which there are insects. So these are, you can say, different degrees. Then there are 12 kinds of mendacity. I guess that means to speak falsely. 1, to tell lies without due reason. 2, falsely to accuse another of broken vows. 3, to provoke disturbance in the religious community by the spreading of false rumors. And 4, to be in agreement with someone who does this. To scandalize the laity by criticism of the monks. Accusing them, for instance, of drinking alcohol. To use a falsehood deliberately, to accuse a monk of favoritism, to denigrate the administrators of the monastery, to accuse another of teaching in order to gain sustenance. 10, to accuse someone of committing residual faults, see below. And 11, to express contempt for the precepts. And finally, 12, to conceal one's share of food with the intention of getting more. All this comes to a total of 19 transgressions. In addition, there is the fault of drunkenness, the 3 kinds of dancing, wearing 3 kinds of ornaments, sleeping in high beds, sleeping in costly beds, taking food after midday, accepting gold and silver. Finally, there is the failure to renounce the manners of the laity. Okay, so let's see. So there are certain lay practices that need to be abandoned. And one is, which is quite common in Asian cultures, that lay people, including the men, would keep their hair long. And then also the failure to assume the specific demeanor of a monk. Let's see what that is. In the sense of wearing the robes and not carrying weapons. Okay. And the failure to show deference to one's abbot. Altogether, this comes to 33 transgressions. Okay. So now there comes then some vows, like I was mentioning before, that have to do with the precepts of the woman novice in training for full ordination. And then I was saying the discussion of this, then we should be prepared that this reflects cultural practices that are not necessarily tinged with toxicity or evil intent. But they come from a sense of practicality that I think both men and women agree on in their particular cultures. But for us from the outside, some of this sounds, to put it mildly, politically incorrect. But nevertheless, we'll have a look at what that entails. It says, women who prepare themselves to take full ordination must renounce 12 extra things, like touching men. And since they're prey to their emotions, they must pass 2 years probation, testing thus their aptitude for vows. I should right away say, as a male grown up in my particular culture, I have always found that male were way inferior in terms of their spirituality, but that's my particular perception. And so I have a particular issue with what I'm reading here. And I hope you can at least embrace what I was proposing before to appreciate the, you could say, cultural nature of what is being said here. It says then, the precepts of a woman novice in training for full ordination, in addition to the 10 major transgressions listed above, women novices in training for full ordination must renounce 12 things. They must avoid the 10 root downfalls of touching a man, and so on. And these, by the way, actually, this is again where we come back to the bhikkhuni ordination. So that's the lineage actually that didn't either was broken or didn't exist in Tibet. So it says here, in addition to touching a man, these are traveling alone, swimming, sitting close to a man, arranging marriages, and concealing the faults of another woman novice in training for full ordination. They must also avoid the 6 related faults, such as the possession of precious metals and stones. So, as above, then, in addition to the fault mentioned, these are shaving the pubic hair, digging the earth, hoarding uneaten food, eating food that has not been offered, and cutting green grass. Please, some of this is beyond me. Anyway, the teachings say, moreover, that given the strength of their emotions, such novices should be tested for 2 years to see whether they're capable of observing the vow. It's only then that they should receive full ordination. Okay. 46. Bhikkhus, so these are then the male, must forswear 4 radical defeats, 13 residual faults, and 30 downfalls that require rejection, 90 mere downfalls, and 4 faults that must be pointedly confessed, together with 112 wrong actions, numbering thus 253 wrong deeds. So these are famously, when you have the ordained bhikkhus, these then they have what is 253 vows that they uphold, that they abstain from. Yeah. So the precepts concerning, these are then the precepts concerning what is to be avoided. The fully ordained monk or bhikkhu must observe 253 precepts. He must abjure 1, the 4 radical defeats. And these are then, I think we mentioned these before, when a root defeat is committed, pe pamba, the monk's ordination is completely destroyed. So that's where I think these consists of what namely killing a human being, stealing, sexual intercourse, and lying. Then you have 13 residual faults, such as masturbation. That's where it says these faults are termed residual hlama, because after their commission, only a residue of the ordination remains. And before such faults are repaired, the monk in question is demoted and required to take last place in the sangha, eating only the food that is left over from the communal meal. And let's just be clear, as with any kind of fault, really, we would say the one good thing about faults are that they can be repaired. Of course, in the case of what we're talking about here, in the case of monastic ordination, then maybe as far as the ordination itself goes, this might be lost. But we're not talking about something that is sort of irretrievably cannot be repaired. So also here that applies to these sort of residual faults as well, and all the other faults. 30 downfalls require rejection, such as the fault of keeping and separation. So downfalls requiring rejection, pangwe tongche, are so called because they can only be repaired by the repudiation of the object through which the downfall has occurred. And they are called downfalls because if they're not repaired, they create the cause of falling into the lower realms. There are 10 such downfalls related separately to monastic robes, seats, and begging bowls. That's 30 altogether. So we can look in Dujum, which is, if you are interested in this, you can look in Dujum, which is Perfect Conduct, pages 34 to 36. I'll pass on this here. And with regards to robes, see below, added to this are 90 mere downfalls, such as speaking in a consciously equivocal way, gossiping about the faults of people who are fully ordained, slandering a bhikkhu, reviving old disputes, and so forth. So these are called downfalls, tungchawa shi, because as with the previous 30, their commission leads to the lower realms, but their separation does not involve the repudiation of the objects. Okay, so we can read about that if we like. 4 faults to be specifically confessed. So these are the 4 faults, soshak deshi, mainly related to the taking of food, are purified by a specific and contrite confession made while standing outside the monastery precincts. Okay. And then there are 112 wrong actions. So these are minor faults of general deportment. In the Theravadan tradition, they are less numerous. So again, these are, and you do have a number of small in the monastic ordination. I remember one of them is, for example, peeing in the green grass. And that's simply because during the, basically because of the animals that are in the grass and so on. We say actually with regards to all these faults that there were particular monks and nuns who were known as I think the 5 naughty ones or something, that did all these kind of things that then where the Buddha then, initially there weren't that many vows, but then as faults accrued, then the Buddha had to say, okay, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't work. You have to do like this, you have to do like that. So that's where these vows eventually sort of accumulated. So taken together, these 5 classes of precepts represent a total of 253 actions to be avoided. So if you will bear with me, I'm going to end here today, simply because of but I'm doing a class in 15 minutes. But I wanted to just go over, actually, there was a few weekends or weeks ago, then there was Veronica that in relation to this, the precepts, and I'll just repeat what they are. It says the precepts are formulated. The precepts as formulated are not to be transgressed. Now, this is where, if you remember, we allow for bodhisattvas, or rather bodhisattvas could commit negative actions with their body and with their speech when it serves to benefit others. This is where the bodhisattva vow, you could say, exceeds beyond the very strict parameters of the vows of individual liberation. But that's where there's certain, you could say, proviso that apply in regards to that. And that's where then here it says, bodhisattvas are permitted to disregard them, particular practices, if this would be a benefit to others. In this situation, an examination must be made to see whether 3 conditions are present. First, the bodhisattva must know that a given negative action, one of the 7, physical or verbal, is of direct benefit to others, and second, that it will be so in the future. Finally, the bodhisattva must be sure that such an action will not obstruct the accumulation of merit, but will rather augment it. These 3 conditions being present, the bodhisattva is allowed to act in an apparently negative way. This is illustrated by the story of Captain Goodhart. So Captain Goodhart is somebody who actually took out somebody, a would-be assassin, somebody that was intent on killing a large number of people. Captain Goodhart took out this person, killed this person, so that they wouldn't commit this negative act that would cause so much suffering for them. So that's also where it's important that of course, there was concern for all those that would be killed, but primarily actually for the person that would commit negative actions, because they would then be thrown into incredible negative, painful experience. So then there was the question here concerning the three conditions for transgression in certain rules. How can the third be independent from the first two? If an action brings benefit to others now and in the future, will it not automatically lead to an increase of merit? Condition number 3. Can you give an example where the first two conditions are met, but not the third? Okay, I had to sort of scratch my head a bit there, and I came up with, well, let's say we're Robin Hood, and that's where we steal from the rich and give to the poor. Now, and when we do that, that is of direct benefit to the poor, and also it'll benefit them in the future. But there could well be, it could well be that the sort of the whole robbing thing could very well become a little bit of a problem. If you then just think, oh, well, robbing's great, and let's just rob from the rich and give to the poor, and then eventually maybe not just to the poor, but maybe keep some for ourselves or whatever. And it could really degenerate. And that's where I think it would be possible that there could be an action that is benefiting right now and also benefiting, in the future. But nevertheless, the act itself, after all, we're talking about negative acts. If all of a sudden killing others or stealing is seen as being something that's completely legit, and that's where I think it could become something that gets in the way of accumulation of merit. So that's how I'm seeing it. Okay, let's just see if there are any other questions. Let's just see. Veronica, did that answer the question? Yeah. Okay. Good. Anybody else have any queries? Is there anything in the chat? Okay. All right. In that case, we'll conclude, and we'll be back next week. Okay. I'll just put up the. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. Thank you very much.